GameMaker's September release, or 2022.9, is similarly to 2022.8, basically a stability release. Bug fixes, cleanup, what have you. Honestly, I'm a fan, more stability the better, and I'm looking forward to getting that long-term stable version, which will almost definitely be my version of choice for the rest of Pokepuck's development, and will hopefully bring me some, well, stability in that regard. If by chance you're a PS4 or 5 developer, it seems you'll need to make sure your SDKs are up to date if you want to use this version. Standard stuff. There are not a lot of flashy highlights to go over with this version, as you might expect given the work towards LTS, and honestly for me, it's been a great year and I want nothing more than for them to make sure everything they've added so far works, before adding even more. I'd hate for GM to spiral into becoming the No Man's Sky of game engines, where it gets an endless emoji list of shiny features on a conveyor belt, but then the program collapses if you breathe on it from the wrong direction. Stability is a good thing, thumbs up from me. But what has changed is the default project layout, which now includes an inspector on the left-hand side. Changes to defaults like this are important because the default communicates a lot about how GameMaker wants you to use it and what sort of things they're pushing. In this case, we see that they're continuing to really drive at the inspector, a concept I've personally struggled with for a while, but I'm starting to understand a bit more. The move overall seems to be away from workspace editing and towards docked editing of basically everything. So here what they're doing is bringing the inspector to the front and putting it where you'd normally see like the room editor when you open a room, and notably in this same update they've brought a lot of room editing functionality to the inspector. Basically, the inspector is going to be replacing the room editor panels that we're used to. The argument here is that their new inspector system is more dynamic and modular and can show you contextually relevant options, rather than cramming all of the various room editing tools into one giant panel. I have to admit, I spend a lot of time scrolling and dragging panels when editing things like views, layers, and other room settings. I imagine this change also plays some role in the longer term overhaul being worked on for the room and other editors, but that remains to be fully seen or understood. The big consequence here though, and I feel like they should mention this in the release blog or notes, really is that you might open your project and see a giant layer panel for your room editor and wonder where on earth the room settings or viewport settings are. Apparently this is an edge case, but it happened with all of my own projects. So if this happens to you and you want to know how to find your room settings, well, you can reach them via an inspector, but to see them, an inspector needs to exist and needs context. So to get things back to how they were, you want to add a new inspector window, put it below your layers dock, select your room in the asset browser, and then optionally hit the lock button here so that it doesn't keep changing when you select new things in the asset browser. Then you have a dedicated inspector for just this room. Yeah, it's a bit fiddly. I think it's in service of good things in the long run, but this seems like an important PSA that was missing from the update notes. Because to me the implication was old layouts would not be affected, but they are, and if you don't know where to find this stuff, it can now feel like a bug, even after reading the release notes. The other new feature worth a mention is you can now have dynamically loaded texture pages, which are loaded from the disk rather than from inside your game's package. This does a couple of things. Firstly, this exposes those texture pages in your game directory, meaning in theory players can easily mod your game by changing those image files directly if they want to. It also means those images are not loaded into RAM immediately, but when the game needs them instead. Or you can also have them only loaded when you explicitly tell the game to load them, which is a bit more manual, but given that loading resources into memory takes a bit of time, you might want to control exactly when that happens to mitigate any potential slowdown. You can also create your own missing texture default sprite in whatever flavor of magenta you like the most. Overall, this all gives you a bit more control over your texture pages and texture memory. One last thing I'll mention is I thought it was interesting that the Opera GX target has been renamed to GX Games. This is just more accurate overall, as you don't really make games for the browser with this target so much as for the publishing environment that is GX Games. I don't know if it's possible based on how I understand the tech, but GX games might eventually be playable through other platforms, but I did find it interesting that they thought this very specific distinction was important enough to make. Perhaps it's as simple as wanting to push and drive awareness of GX games specifically, rather than just the browser itself, where you might think, well, HTML5 works on all browsers, right? The unique selling point is this particular ecosystem and environment, so I suppose it makes sense to focus on that. That's everything though, not a flashy update by any means, and please trust me, I'm not trying to shill for GameMaker when I say that it's important that we recognize that low feature updates are fine, good, and necessary. We're all feature hungry and I want my hands on all the fun things mentioned in the last roadmap as much, if not more, than anybody. But I also want them to work, and stability and bugs are among my biggest gripes with GameMaker right now, so I'm very happy to see the time go where it's going. Thank you to my patrons for funding my work, thank you to the collective patience of everybody while I work on new tutorial content, and thank you for watching all the way to the end. Catch you all next time.